All right, so we're back, and we are starting with the first film, Little Women, which is the latest adaptation of the Louise May Alcott famous American novel that we've all seen in multiple different adaptations over the years. This time it was directed by Greta Gerwig, and we picked these films way before before all of the news that's been coming out, but I think you might have known that it was snubbed from the BAFTAs. It wasn't nominated, or Greta was not nominated for Best Director of the Golden Globes or BAFTAs. And we are pre-recording this, so I won't be able to tell you whether or not that's the case for the Oscars either. But the film is about four sisters during the time of over like a 7-year period. It's a really famous novel, and Jo is played by Saoirse Ronan, and Meg by Emma Watson. Florence Pugh plays Amy, and Eliza Scanlon plays Beth. Marmee is played by Laura Dern, and then we have a lovely, I forgot her name, but Meryl Streep. What is the aunt? As the horrible aunt, yes. So I saw this last night. It actually took me a couple weeks to decide to do it. I really loved I grew up with the 1994 edition and with Winona Ryder and whatnot. So the idea of doing another adaptation of Little Women wasn't something I was jumping to see, even though I'm massively in love with Greta Gerwig's work. And I was blown away. I think I read some reviews that said this was near perfect, and to me, it was a near perfect film. So I'm shocked that all the other films that have been getting all the the press and the nominations, that Little Women didn't see itself at the forefront of these nominations. What do you guys think?
So this is my first experience of the Little Women story. I haven't read the book. I only really have a vague awareness of it because the book is more of an American thing anyway, but I've only got really a vague awareness of the story. I haven't seen any of the other adaptations like the 1994 film or anything like that. I thought this was excellent. I thought it was a brilliant film. I'm going to disagree on the near perfect. I thought it was a little bit choppy at the start. I found it a little bit hard to follow, maybe in the first 20 minutes or so. The way Greta Gerwig has done it, because of course she adapted it and wrote the script here as well, is we've kind of got interweaving timelines of the later period when Saoirse Ronan's Jo is coming back to Concord, Massachusetts to see Beth, her ill sister, and then their earlier scenes from childhood when they were all still at home. And I did find it a little bit hard to follow at the start. Even then, I think she's doing some interesting stuff. I've actually seen this twice, right? I saw it in early December, and then I saw it again when I was in the States over Christmas because I went with some friends to see it. And even then, the part that I found quite hard to follow at the start, she's doing a lot of stuff to set up character interactions and our understanding of kind of the dynamics of these characters later on. So whilst it was a little bit hard to follow at first, she's still doing a lot of kind of necessary, interesting stuff there. After that, I thought it settled into kind of a beautiful storytelling rhythm, really. And, it's not necessarily the most flashy way of delineating these timelines. Like, we've got different color grading, we've got different kind of like color palettes going on, but it means that you can then follow that story and you can follow those two timelines really well, really easily. And I think that's why I'm kind of surprised she's not popped up in more of these awards director conversations, because I think it is a really well directed film. I do. And to take that story and make that easy to follow, as I say, after an initial kind of rocky start for me, it then really makes it an easy story to connect with when they're linking back to experiences in their life. And the performances are all excellent. So, for me, it ticked a lot of boxes, and I really think it was a superbly made film.
I think I'm together with Jim in not having seen any adaptation before of this novel, and also probably one of the only women in the world who haven't read the novel itself. So I was pretty new to the story and everything. Although, yeah, of course, I've got some back knowledge of that. And that said, I was really, really intrigued by the film. And yeah, I agree. I think in the very beginning could have been a little bit confusing. Almost mainly because, it starts pretty much at the very end of the novel itself. So with people like knowing the story, they might have been like, oh, but this is the ending, so why is I here? And with like people not knowing the story, it might have been what's happening. And then at first it's not really clear when they're like we're back in time and then like in the present and stuff like that. But I think that when it gets like to the middle section of the film and like to the most like emotional and like gripping part of the film, it's just amazing how Gerwig handles like this non-linear storyline, and also like the color palettes, as Jim was mentioning, they're just really great. I mean, they are really helpful like for maybe people not really use like watching this kind of art house films and following like different way of handling like storylines. So yeah, color palettes were really great for like basically detecting and like understanding what was happening and when that thing was happening. So we got a lot of like cold colors and this kind of a shallow palette, and then at the other side of the spectrum we've got this like beautiful autumny color and like an amazing photography. So yeah, I mean, that really nailed it. And also like performances wise, the film was great. And to be honest, I'm not really surprised that the film got snubbed by like male critics. I think mostly because, I mean, the story in the end, like, it's kind of the like female story, like the epitome of a female story. So I'm guessing that majority of male critics, they didn't read that, and they're not just interested maybe in female directed films, so maybe not that much. So yeah, no surprise there for me, but maybe just me not being like very hoping and hopeful for like people to get into films or like different kind of directors. So that's me. But yeah, anyway, it was a great film, so I hope it gets like some satisfaction at the Oscars.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned how it's been snubbed potentially on the grounds of the fact that it's got a female director, and not only a female director but a female writer, the same Greta Gerwig, and also a predominantly female cast. And I think your average male moviegoer, and sadly your average male BAFTA voter or award voter, looks at it and assumes that there's nothing in it for them. Talking about the structure of the film as well in relation to that, the way Greta Gerwig kind of restructured the film and kind of changed Joe's story, that's one of the biggest kind of criticisms that a lot of women have over the book, is that Louise May Alcott kind of concedes, and instead of having Jo go on to be this kind of single emancipated writer that she maybe wanted her to be and that maybe lots of people craved for her to be, she settled, and Jo settled and got married. And I think there are lots of dualities between the character of Jo, Louise May Alcott, and now Greta Gerwig herself as a female auteur. She is reported to have not thought that this film was one that she would get a chance to direct. So she took the script to the studio and was really kind of excited about the idea of the film getting made in this way that she had written it, this way that she had structured it. But she believed that the project was going to get passed on to someone with greater experience, someone who could tell the story with more skill than she could. And I think that's such a marker of this imposter syndrome that so many women have, both in the arts and across the world, is that they feel like they need to have done so much more than maybe the average man feels like he needs to do before he can come and sit in that director's chair, CEO of that company, whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, it would be great for Greta to see some awards come out of this, but I think she can at least rest easy on the fact that it's been such an audience celebrated film, and that in itself is such an important thing.
Absolutely. And I went into a little research on how she looked at this piece, and speaking of the structure that you were talking about, I did feel a little bit at the beginning, this is a different way. It's sort of expectations you have of being an American who's read the book and who's seen all the adaptations and grew up with it. And it was a very, very important book for females growing up. I think that some of the things that you had with expectations, and one example would be the Amy character, originally in '94 was by Kirsten Dunst, and she was quite bratty. And then even within the book, supposedly she's a brat. But what I read is that Greta was really kind of finding like her voice and making her kind of a more well-rounded character. So at first when I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, she doesn't have that sort of Kirsten Dunst like spunk or something like that. But then ultimately what happened was the way that Greta did so much research. I mean, there's so much almost like dramaturgy, as if you will, like about a book, and then turning it into a script that was having a dialogue with, as almost, I think she said, her as a modern scriptwriter, and then Louise May Alcott, and then these performers. I think is just really spectacular. And I think, Serena, you were mentioning the photography. There were parts of that film that just blew me away, like particularly the beach scenes with, I was very quite, like you said, like certain soft palettes, but then like this just beautiful, like sort of sun on the characters. Just absolutely stunning, like more than many films I saw last year. So that would actually be my favorite film. If I could go back and do our favorite films of last year, I wish I could have put that one on there.
Yeah, that's the thing. We did that blog post that we did for our favorite films of 2019. I think it would have been in there for me. It's interesting the fact that like men don't seem particularly interested in this film, and I really can't put it down to anything more than the title, quite frankly. I mean, literally the fact that it's called Little Women, because obviously there's a lot in there, and the main kind of thrust of it is the role of women in society and what's expected of them, and I mean that's fairly obvious from watching the film. That's a massive thread through it, but it's not as if there's not things for people outside of that gender to relate to. And one thing that I found quite interesting with the whole it was really the kind of the storyline that covers Joe, Laurie, and Amy, and Amy is the one who ends up going to Europe. And it was just all these little things that just knock your life in a different direction. The little things that happen, which then set you on a path which is really quite different to the one that you'd maybe had imagined for yourself. And that's one aspect of it that I feel is kind of universal. I think this idea of a fondness for the innocence of childhood, that is a common one. So I find it a little bit depressing that it doesn't maybe get a little bit more of a fair shake on that sort of basis. On the Amy character, which we were talking about, it was absolutely wild to me when I went and read about the book afterwards that there's kind of like this anti-Amy movement. Like people, like when people are doing the kind of the discussion of like, oh, which March sister are you? Nobody seems to want to be Amy. Absolutely no one. And I think credit really needs to go to Greta Gerwig's script and Florence Pugh's performance for making her a very relatable character. And when she's playing the younger scenes, where confusingly I think she's meant to be about 13 years old, but I actually think Florence Pugh does quite a good job with that. She is very relatable. I mean, yeah, she is a bit bratty. She's like, she's maybe a little bit entitled and spoiled, but you can relate to it, and what she wants out of life, and how her goals differ to that of Joe. And I think they've done a very good job of that, especially when I do see the reaction to the character in general. I was kind of surprised. So I think there's a certain amount of rehabilitation of characters that has gone on in the script, and I don't think anybody is particularly favoured. I don't think anyone's path, Joe, Beth, Meg, any of the characters, I don't think they're particularly favoured as like, oh, well, this is the more worthy thing to do. This is what you should be doing. And I think that's an important thing to present with those characters, and I think they've done an excellent job of doing that, and that belongs to both Gerwig's script and the performances of the actors.
Yeah, and I also I saw this really funny sort of thing that I think it was somebody from Sex and the City watched. I think it was Cynthia Nixon, and she was like, "It's us," There's this like funny way that there's this combination of this storyline of four powerful women and four women sort of coming together, and storylines that we see throughout time that people respond to, and the way she filmed it has maybe some sort of similarities to that, which I thought was quite funny that I there was that connection. But I would be remiss not to mention again what you said, Carice, about the way that Greta plays in that story about Joe and her relationship. So the way that she handles the fact that Joe ends up, again, previous stories, or actually the book, she ends up marrying an old professor, and who she ends up in this case, the way, I won't spoil too much, but it really does play with the idea of meta-ness in a film, and how a story was maybe expected to be told and at the time, and what maybe she would have wanted it to be told,
Absolutely. And, similarly to what Jim says, there are so many different narratives for each of the women in the film, and that is important. That people aren't coming away from the film saying, okay, so Joe does not want to end up marrying a man, but it's absolutely fine for Meg to get married. And that's the really important message here, is that there's not one thing that makes you a woman, one thing that makes you a feminist. It's just that choice, that option, that chance to make that decision completely freely out of your own will. And it's also interesting that we talk about relatability in terms of bringing in the audience. And I completely agree with you, Jim. There are so many things there that people who don't identify as female can come to this film, and they can find messages in it that they can relate to, and they can find stories in it that they see themselves and their friends and family in. But also, does it need to be relatable to bring men in? For decades, for a century, women have been going to see films that don't have them in it. They don't have a strong representative female character or any female characters in, but you go and watch it because it's what's there, and it's, you know, it's entertaining, it's whatever. And obviously there are films that are more problematic, and there are films that we can still as women go see with, I mean, we're about to talk about 1917. There's not a single female character in that. Just one female character, thanks. And that, I don't think, has fallen to the same kind of issues that Little Women have, where male voters just haven't shown up to the BAFTA screenings. And I think that's quite interesting as a kind of point that we're at in this time.
Yeah, I mean, I totally have to agree with Carice there. It's totally beyond me that, like, in 2020 we're still here debating if a film like with a mainly female cast should have something in it for, like, men, to force them to go and watch a film. I mean, I'm like, is it just so hard to understand it? Like, we're just human beings, and we're just sharing, like, the same emotions and everything. So it's nothing like with gender defining, like, our emotions or the way we live our lives. So it's just crazy and, like, kind of a not very progressive thinking maybe, but yeah, I don't know. And also, like, speaking about gender, I've read some interesting things about, like, the character of Joe being, like, kind of coded in, like, queer things, and, like, I mean, I think that could be like a reading of the film. And I mean, I wasn't really bothered in the end by the fact that she could be getting married with a man, because I mean, in the end, I mean, it's her life. She a very independent character. She's like, she has a progressive mind. She's really open-minded. She knows what she wants to do with her life, and she's really, like, yeah, leading her life. So I'm not I'm not one of those women who thinks, like, you shouldn't be. I mean, she's not defined by a man, and if she decides to just get married with a man, that's perfectly fine. And I think it's interesting to see, like, the two storylines of, like, Joe and Meg together, especially, like, regarding the how they see marriage. Marriage is quite an important part, like, in all the film. We go, like, different ways of, like, dealing with the idea of, like, getting married with a man and maybe not being able to just thrive in the artistic scene. So everything is really taken for. Cared for, like, in the script. So yeah, what I was trying to say is that, I mean, whatever the reading and the characters, I really love, like, how Jo was played, and also, like, the fact that she was kind of gender non-conforming in terms of, like, dresses and also, like, costumes and what she was thinking, what she said in the film. So it's just such a modern adaptation of the novel, and yeah, I mean, it was just great.
Yeah, I think all the things that we're saying about the film, I think mainly, if we were going to summarise them, I think the thing to get across is this is not a staid, stuffy period adaptation of a 19th century novel. I mean, obviously, it's an adaptation of a 19th century novel, but there's a lot of modern ideas woven in here. There's a very modern approach taken to it, and it is very interesting. There's a lot going on. I mean, it's a very good story, and it's very easy, in my opinion, to follow, and, you know, it's very involving, but there is also a lot of very good ideas going on, both on the surface and under the hood, if you peer a little bit little bit closer. So there's a lot to recommend it.
Well, and I think that is a complete in honor of that novel, that 19th century novel being very modern, being very feminist, being a wonderful, wonderful piece that people want to relook at in different ways over and over and over time. And of course, to Greta Gerwig, who did, I think we all agree, an exceptional job that should be, at least if it's not in this round of nominations, it will over time be very, very well appreciated, and we hope you go see it.